Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this podcast today on artist books. My name's Lee Christien, and I've been doing some research into artist books at the libraries in a special collection at the University of Brighton. And I'm really pleased today to be joined by Paul Sammut from Bookworks. So thank you for joining me, Paul. And the first thing I'd like to ask you is could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what your role is at Bookworks?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Lee. My role at Bookworks is publishing manager, which is quite broad. Partly because we're such a small organisation, so we're all involved in lots of different ways. But the bulk of my role is managing the sales and distribution. It's probably worth saying that we are, as we're a small organisation, we're all part time. So we're all working on other things outside. So outside of Bookworks, I'm an artist and curator, um, and yeah, it's that life you're balancing kind of the money work and then a creative practice.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for kind of introducing us to a bit about who you are and kind of what you do. And hopefully maybe we can kind of dig back into that a little bit later and come back to that because I think that's a really interesting point that you make about kind of creative practice and work and how we balance these things. Could I just ask you a little bit about explain to our listeners like what Bookworks is as a kind of an organisation?
Yeah, so Bookworks we were set up in 1984, and essentially an arts commissioning organisation. So we're an NPO, so we're part funded by the Arts Council, Arts Council England, and we're as a commissioning organisation, we we fund things like residencies and exhibitions, but the bulk of what we do is produce artist books. So currently, as we stand, as an organisation, we're split into two sections. So we have a studio that produces kind of specialist bookmaking, box making, binding services. They'll kind of guide people who are making their own books, and they'll kind of guide people through them and do the production. And then the other side, which is the side that I work on, is the commissioning side, where we have a kind of public program which includes publishing. So we were set up in the 80s by some bookbinders in South London, and that including Rob Hadrill and Jane Rollo, who up until a few years ago, probably about 5 years ago, were both still running the organisation. And Rob's still working with us, and Jane's working on some kind of independent projects now that she's retirement age. Rob runs the studio, and now our new director, Gavin Everall, runs the publishing side, the commissioning side of things.
Thank you very much, Paul, for kind of introducing to that like kind of really interesting kind of insight into kind of what Bookworks is and kind of like where it's come from and how it kind of fits together and with commissioning. So just on that question, I'd like to ask you sort of so what exactly are artist books? Can you tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, I guess, because it's incredibly broad. Um, so and in my mind, uh, yeah. So kind of speaking to kind of what we do, an artist book is essentially a book that is an artist project. So it's kind of it's like you would make a sculpture or you would make a painting or an installation. And in this case, you're making a book, and it's kind of using that space of a book, which has kind of unique properties to it, and turning that into an artist project. So, for example, with a book, there's a tradition with the traditional books, the space of a book, you have kind of a sense of narrative. There's a sense of time with the turning of the pages as an object, and this was key for why Bookworks started publishing as an object. There's a democracy of distribution. So Bookworks, when they started publishing, previous to that, they were organizing exhibitions, but they started publishing in kind of standard book formats, artist books that would be able to go as far as possible. It basically means that it's an object that is easily distributable, and so the work can be shared incredibly widely.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think that's a
That
really,
answer.
yeah, that's an amazing answer to kind of what an artist book is or can be, and particularly from how Bookworks approach it. And I think that's one of the reasons I want to talk to you, because it's a really exciting kind of institution and publisher. And I love how you sort of discuss in terms of this sort of commissioning process and projects, and using the format to kind of distribute more widely kind of creative practice and exhibitionary practice, but through a book. And I think one of the things that I found sort of looking into sort of the collection that we have is Bookworks, because they've been around for such a long time, from 1984, just the rich history that's attached to this kind of discipline, if you like. And I'm just wondering, I know we were talking about sort of certain projects, but thinking about why are books, and I know you've already spoken to this, but why are they such a good format for this? And I know you've spoken to about sort of the sense of time, the kind of formats of the book, and what makes them kind of unique from other books. And I guess you've kind of already answered this question, but I found your answer really great.
Well, I think it's still an interesting kind of. It's interesting to kind of kind of dig into it, because of, we do as part of our kind of, we're a charity as well. So as part of our kind of offer, we do free artist surgeries once a month for people who are working on book projects, and there's always this. There's often an element of people want to make a book. Everybody wants to make a book, and if you've got a practice, you want to. Lots of people want to make a book. Most people love books, and to have your work kind of shared in that format can be exciting, and it's again an accessible way of sharing your practice. But when you're thinking about it as a project in itself, as a work in itself, sorry, it the work doesn't always have to be a book. So it's kind of negotiating those properties of that space. One of the first questions I often ask is does it need to be a book? But there are also different ways of publishing. So depending on what you want for the project, it could just be a flyer, or it could actually make more sense as a video project, or it's thinking about the book in that kind of context. I think that it's interesting to kind of explore that space and whether it's actually even appropriate.
I think that's a really, really great point, and I think that's really exciting to think about as well, and to have in mind or that's something certainly that kind of comes to mind when I approach sort of artist books and trying to think about kind of what makes this kind of project unique as a book, and that sense of ideas. And I think so sometimes they can be quite frustrating, but also they give a lot as well if you take time with them and to sort of think through some of these kind of questions, and it seems very open in that way, and I think that's what's really kind of, for me, what's really exciting. And just another quick question for you, Paul. I was just wondering, are there any kind of like sort of projects that really sort of stand out to you within kind of like the current list or the kind of the backlist at all, that Bookworks have sort of published?
Yeah, I was having a look before we were going to speak, and there's lots that I'm kind of excited about. But that there's I'm interested in kind of popular culture. So we have a book from, I think, what was the date of it? A book by Michael Bracewell and Linda, which was, sorry, I was just checking the date. I think that would have been, I think it was the early 2000s, but it's kind of like a gazetteer. It's called I Know Where I'm Going, a guide to Morecambe and Heysham. So it's that kind of area near Lancaster, and it's a gathering of kind of ephemera to tell the story of kind of moving into that area and the stories around that area, which I think is incredibly fun, but also a great use of the book and sharing those kind of everyday items. I think and a really interesting project we have from maybe about 6 years ago was a project with Sophie Collins, the poet. Um, and we, as an organisation, we have an open call every year, and we usually invite a guest editor to set a theme. And for us, it's to kind of cast the net wider. You know, we do as because we're funded by the Arts Council, we have to apply for our funding in cycles with the programme. But key for Bookworks has always been to have an open call. And this, so one of our open calls, we were organising residencies in collections, and Sophie Collins applied with a proposal for a project in Glasgow Women's Library, and she spent some time in the library collections, kind of collecting instances and responses to assault, kind of, and and she used this kind of metaphor for small white monkeys as a kind of representation of her kind of shame of her experience, and then explored kind of other women's experiences and created some kind of beautiful writing and sometimes funny writing that shared other women's experiences of that as well. So it was a real kind of exploration of it and of other kind of creative responses. I can go on. So
yeah, I mean,
just kind
thank
of
you.
mention.
Yeah, I mean,
Or,
those two, I think those are two fantastic projects as well. I mean, the Linda book about that area, that sense of ephemerality and the collection together is a really good example of kind of one route people take with these sort of projects, and then like Sophie Collins's book that you sort of mentioned, and I think there's with Bookworks, although I'm not familiar with that particular project, I love those kind of works that really sort of for me personally sort of like really delve into the kind of the archive and different voices coming through. And I think that's and with using writing and stories, really exciting. So I'm definitely going to check that one out as well. But did you have some others that have kind of stood out for you as well, Paul?
there's I mean I'm always a fan of Katrina Palmer's
Yeah.
first book, which also came from Open Call. It was a series guest edited by Stuart Home, and Katrina. The series was playing around with narrative, essentially, kind of in a nutshell. And this was Katrina's first book, and we've since worked with her, I think, on perhaps 5 other books now, with the Touch report that was published alongside her National Gallery residency. But I'll kind of leave that. But if anybody gets the chance to read The Dark Object by Katrina Palmer, that's my recommendation. We've got a beautiful little project from Alison Turnbull, which is from the back catalogue, published in 2002, which is called Spring Snow, a translation. And it's a translation in colour of Yukio Mishima's book Spring Snow. So effectively, she pulls out all of the colour references throughout the course of Mishima's book, and then I'm showing you this because you can see it.
Yes.
But and then lists all the colours. All the colours are kind of make up the body of the book, and then because there's also already a translation from the Japanese to the English in Mishima's writing, then elements of this are then translated back into Japanese as well, and it makes for a really beautiful object, uh, and a really interesting kind of way of delving back into Mishima's book as well. So kind of the
Yeah. These wonderful
references come back
examples.
and
Well, these are really wonderful projects as well, and I'm not familiar with some of these, but again, they kind of ring true to kind of like that the spirit of kind of some of these projects that work really well. And I think this idea of translation and also revisiting books as a form through the content, and then how we think about visuality in relation to that. In Alison Turnbull's work, and just to touch upon Katrina Palmer as well, I think we've got quite a lot of her. What I'll do is after this, alongside this podcast, is pull together some reading lists and pull together her works, because I think the Stuart Home series as a guest editor is a really fascinating one. And I'm just sort of made me think of Deborah Levy's book as well, and some of these kind of
yeah.
different genres of kind of avant-garde writing, and then alongside these sort of visuality and the book as object, are all really fascinating themes. And so it's it's a pleasure to hear some more, and I'll try and get these on the reading list to sort of share, so people can kind of have a look
Brilliant.
at,
Yeah.
and then also encourage people to get involved and look to bookworks as a publisher, and that's fantastic. So
Brilliant.
one thing that I kind of wanted to dig back to, or just to refer back to, Paul, if that's okay with you, is I know you've already said about your role and really explained really nicely about kind of how publishing at Bookworks kind of works. So that sense of a team and people sort of working together. So it's not just about the editors who we've spoken about and the authors, but it's also about this wider context. So you've spoken to about kind of like funding from the Arts Council and particular ways of thinking about how you run projects, and also yourself being a practitioner as well as somebody who's working in the area as well. So I was just wondering what your kind of thoughts about publishing and working in this area, if that's not too broad a question.
I think that and one of the things I love about Bookworks is that because we're small and we've remained small, you know, that the program is developed as a team. So my role in sales and distribution is obviously is kind of getting the books into bookshops, you know, having those relationships with the people who are literally selling the books, organizing our attendance at book fairs, those kinds of things. So obviously that's all really kind of key, but because we're all doing these other things, and because we're part-time, you know, those kind of experiences can also feed back into the organization. So we'll develop a program together, and our Arts Council application as a team, which is a really nice to work. And also, you know, I was able to, a few years ago, I was able to actually lead on and edit a book at one of our projects with Prem Sahib. So that there are kind of there is room for movement in that way, if there's time. Obviously, you know, we've remained small because obviously, as with every arts organization, kind of, you know, budgets are tight, and we're and also the kind of works that we make, you know, in today's kind of climate, people outlets kind of want to take less of a chance. So that makes it more tricky. I mean, back in the 80s, you'd be able to sell directly into each individual kind of shop, even if it was a chain. You know, they'd each have their buyers, and so you would be in kind of places like Waterstones. But these days, you know, there are specific types of bookshops like Tender Books or Good Press that that support us.
Yeah, that's really interesting, a point, and I think that's why part of the reason why I wanted to kind of like celebrate Bookworks, to kind of sort of for our students, and kind of and sort of like highlight, you know, what amazing objects that these are, and people who've been working in this for a long time, and kind of almost what a labour of love it is. alongside a really creative process and a really kind of engaging way. And I think it's kind of fantastic that you're quite all often quite practitioners working together and in a kind of a really interesting way. I just want to sort of wrap up quickly, Paul, and just sort of ask you: do you have any other projects coming up at the moment, or any events, or any book fairs? Because I know you kind of do these types of things as well.
Yeah, we've got there's the ICA are running a new book fair in September this year, so we're looking forward to kind of taking part in that. I mean, London probably has more book fairs than any other location in the UK. So and there's also a multicultural book fair in London at Conway Hall in September that we weren't able to take part in last year, but hopefully we'll be able to participate in this year. We've got a book coming up with Catherine Scanlon, which is exciting, which is actually we're publishing a UK edition of the US edition of that book. And Dawn have since published a couple of other books, so her kind of profile has raised, and it's I think the right time to get the book that was previously published out, which is a bit more experimental and into the market here. So that'll be exciting. We've also got, sorry, we don't have much time, do we? So
oh no,
I can tell you a lot about projects, but
yeah, no, that sounds fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me, Paul. I really genuinely appreciate it, and yeah, it's been fantastic. Like find out a bit more about kind of your role at Bookworks and kind of what Bookworks are, and some of the exciting projects that I'm going to encourage everybody to look into. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks, Lee. Take care.